I was 14 the day the photo was taken, the so-called family portrait. July in Connecticut, the kind of summer day that sticks to your skin and makes you dream of jumping into Lake Candlewood. The lawn had just been mowed, and the smell of fresh-cut grass hung in the air as everyone gathered in our backyard. Dad was fussing with the tripod, squinting at the little screen on his Canon while Marissa, my stepmother of 3 years, kept fixing her honey blonde hair every 5 seconds. She wore a cream-colored sundress that made her look like she'd stepped out of a Pottery Barn catalog. My little half-brother Ethan, only 5 and blissfully unaware of the household currents, chased butterflies nearby in his carefully pressed khakis. Marissa's parents, who'd driven up from Westport for the weekend, stood chatting with my father about property values and school districts. Their voices drifted across the yard, light and unconcerned, the kind of conversation that doesn't require much thought. I stood off to the side, awkward in my favorite blue dress, the one Mom had helped me pick out at the Danbury Fair Mall before she got sick. It hadn't fit right for months, too tight around the shoulders now, but I couldn't bear to stop wearing it. My dark hair was pulled back with the silver barrette Grandma Ellis had given me for my birthday, and I'd even put on a little mascara, hoping it might make me look like I belonged. Almost ready, Dad called out, setting the timer. Everyone gather round the bench. I watched as they arranged themselves, Marissa in the center, her hand possessively on my father's arm, Ethan perched on her knee, her parents standing behind them like proud sentinels. They were creating a Norman Rockwell painting, and I was the smudge on the canvas. Finally, I approached, my heart racing with each step. Just as the timer was about to go off, just as I was about to squeeze in beside my father, Marissa turned to me. Her lips curved into what anyone else might mistake for a smile, but I recognized the cold glint in her eyes. "Not you, Emma," she whispered, her voice honey-coated poison. She reached out as if to straighten my collar, but instead, her manicured fingers pressed against my shoulder, nudging me, no, pushing me back out of the frame. I stumbled backwards, my ankle twisting slightly on the uneven ground. Confusion gave way to burning humiliation as I realized what was happening. I looked to my father, willing him to notice, to say something, but his eyes were fixed on the camera lens, his smile wide and oblivious. "Perfect," he called. "Hold it." The camera flashed, capturing their perfect family moment. A moment that didn't include me. I stood frozen, the world suddenly muffled like I was underwater. Mrs. Peterson from next door waved from over the fence, probably thinking I'd stepped away by choice. Marissa's father was already checking his watch, eager to get to their dinner reservation at Sal's Steakhouse in town. Ethan ran to me, showing me a caterpillar on his finger, but Marissa quickly called him back, her voice sweet but insistent. "Don't bother your sister, honey. Come help Mommy pack up the cookies." I watched them disperse, drifting toward the patio doors like a school of fish, moving together in perfect unison. No one looked back. No one seemed to notice the invisible wall that had just been erected, with me on one side and everyone else on the other. I told myself maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe she didn't mean it like that. Maybe she thought I didn't want to be in the photo. But the pressure of her fingers against my shoulder had been deliberate, and the look in her eyes unmistakable. It wasn't the first time she'd tried to erase me from our family narrative, the forgotten birthday card, my name left off the Christmas stockings, the school events she conveniently scheduled family outings during. It was just the first time she'd succeeded so completely, so publicly. After they'd all gone inside, I sat alone on the wooden swing my father had built years ago, back when it was just the 3 of us, him, Mom, and me. Back when I felt like I belonged somewhere. My fingers trembled as I clutched my phone, scrolling through contacts. I wanted to call someone, anyone. But who? Mom had been gone for 4 years. My old friends from before the move rarely returned my texts anymore. There was Katie from English class, but we weren't really close enough for this kind of conversation. There was only Dad. Dad, who used to check under my bed for monsters. Dad, who taught me to ride a bike in the elementary school parking lot on weekends. Dad, who somehow couldn't see what was happening right in front of him. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that would have been beautiful if I hadn't felt so hollow inside. A mosquito landed on my arm, and I watched it dispassionately as it began to feed. The small pain was almost a relief, a confirmation that I was still here, still real, still capable of feeling something. Eventually, I brushed it away and stood up. Through the sliding glass door, I could see them all in the kitchen. Marissa was at the island, arranging a cheese plate while my father poured wine. Ethan sat at the counter with chocolate milk and a cookie. They looked like a magazine advertisement for family happiness. I took a deep breath and walked inside, preparing myself for the conversation I needed to have with my father. Somehow, I already knew he wouldn't hear me. But I had to try. I had to know for sure if I still had a place in his heart. That night, I waited until Marissa and Ethan were upstairs, until the house settled into its nighttime rhythm of distant TV sounds and creaking floorboards. Dad was in his study, the soft glow of his laptop illuminating his face as he scrolled through emails. I knocked softly on the doorframe, my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape. "Hey, he said, glancing up with a tired smile. "What's up, kiddo?" I stepped into the room, letting my fingers trail along the spines of the books that lined his shelves, history books and biographies that he'd always promised to discuss with me someday when things weren't so busy. When was the last time we'd had a real conversation? Not the surface-level exchanges about homework or household chores, but the kind of talks we used to have on our Saturday morning drives to get donuts from Dixie's on Main Street. "Dad, I need to talk to you about something." My voice came out smaller than I intended. He swiveled his chair to face me, but his eyes kept darting back to his screen. "A deadline for work, probably. Always a deadline." "Of course. What's on your mind?" The words tumbled out before I could organize them properly. I told him everything, the look in Marissa's eyes, the push, the way they all acted like I didn't exist during the photo. How it wasn't just today, but a pattern of small cruelties and exclusions that had been building since she moved into our house on Maple Drive. How I felt like a ghost in my own home. I expected, hoped, that my father would be outraged on my behalf. That the man who once threatened to call the principal over a teacher who'd embarrassed me in class would rise to my defense again. That he'd put down his work, hold me close, and promise it would never happen again. That he'd be my dad again, just for a moment. Instead, his expression changed from confusion to disbelief to something worse, disappointment. He pushed his glasses up, a gesture I'd seen 1,000 times, usually before he delivered unwelcome news. "Emma," he sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "Marissa would never do that to you. I know things have been difficult since she and Ethan came into our lives, but she's really trying." My throat tightened. "Dad, I'm not making this up." "I'm not saying you are, exactly." He chose his words carefully, the way he did when negotiating with clients. "But sometimes we see what we expect to see. You've been resistant to Marissa from the beginning. That's not true." I tried. "Let me finish, please." His voice took on the edge it did when his patience was wearing thin. "You just didn't want to be in the photo, admit it. You've been pulling away from family activities for months now. Always in your room, always with your headphones on." Something inside me cracked. Because I don't feel welcome. Because every time I try to be part of this family, she finds a way to push me out. That's enough. He stood up, towering over me the way he hadn't done since I was small. "I will not have you making accusations about Marissa. She's my wife, Emma. She's given up a lot to make this family work. And I haven't?" The words burned my throat. "I lost Mom, then I lost our house, my school, my friends when we moved here to be closer to Marissa's job. And now I'm losing you too." His face softened slightly, but not enough. "Nobody's losing anybody. You're just going through a phase. 14 is hard. I get it. But you can't blame Marissa for everything that's difficult in your life." In that moment, I realized something that shook me to my core. The words that had felt so powerful, so true in my head, meant nothing to him. My truth was inconvenient, disruptive to the new life he'd built. The evidence of my pain was outweighed by his desire for things to be simple. His words shattered me more than Marissa's actions ever could. I had been trying to build a relationship with him ever since Mom died, tiptoeing around his grief, giving him space, trying to be the perfect, undemanding daughter. I tried to be patient with his new marriage, tried to find my place in this new version of our family. I made an effort with Marissa, even when her smiles never reached her eyes. I played with Ethan, though every time he called me sister, I felt Mom's absence like a physical wound. But at that moment, I realized I had no place here. I was a guest in my own home. Worse, I was unwanted. I didn't scream or cry. Something had gone cold inside me. I just turned and walked away, his voice following me down the hallway. Emma? Emma, come back here. We're not finished talking. But we were. We had said everything that needed to be said. In my bedroom, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars Mom and I had stuck on the ceiling years ago. They had faded with time, barely visible now even in the darkness. Like me, fading away in this house until soon no one would remember I was ever here. A plan formed, simple and clear. I wasn't going to stay where I wasn't wanted. I wasn't going to keep fighting for scraps of attention and affection. I moved quietly, methodically. I pulled my duffel bag, the one we'd used for our trip to Cape Cod this summer before Mom got sick, from under my bed. I packed just the essentials, a few changes of clothes, my toothbrush, my journal with its worn leather cover, and the silver locket Mom had given me before she died. Inside was a tiny photo of the two of us, our faces pressed together, laughing at something now forgotten. I added my school ID, my library card, and the emergency cash I'd been saving from birthday money and babysitting jobs, nearly $200. Not much, but enough. I slipped the photo of Mom and me from my nightstand into the side pocket of the bag. Then, almost as an afterthought, I grabbed my copy of Anne of Green Gables, my comfort book for as long as I could remember. I wrote a note short, direct, I need some time. Don't worry about me. I'm safe. I left it on my pillow where he would find it. The house was silent as I crept downstairs. The digital clock on the microwave read 5:17 a.m. Through the kitchen window, I could see the sky beginning to lighten, just barely, a promise of dawn still an hour away. I walked out the door, closing it softly behind me. The morning air was cool on my face, heavy with dew and possibility. The street was empty, the houses dark. In one of them, Mrs. Abernathy would be getting up soon to walk her golden retriever, Chester. In another, Mr. Patel would be preparing to open his convenience store on Turner Street. But they wouldn't see me. By the time Waterbury woke up, I would be gone. I adjusted my backpack, took one last look at the house where I no longer belonged, and started walking toward the bus station 3 miles away. I didn't look back. The world was quiet, but inside me, a storm had already begun. My grandmother lived in Glastonbury, a small town about 2 hours from Waterbury. I'd always loved visiting her cozy Cape Cod house with its cheerful yellow door and the wildflower garden that seemed to have no rhyme or reason, but somehow worked beautifully. As a child, those visits had been bright spots, weekends of baking cookies, watching old movies, and listening to stories about Mom when she was young. I took the earliest bus I could find from the Waterbury station, clutching my ticket and keeping my head down. A woman with kind eyes asked if I was okay traveling alone. I told her I was meeting my dad at the other end, the first of what would likely be many lies in the coming days. The bus pulled away, carrying me through towns that gradually gave way to more rural landscapes, the morning mist still clinging to fields and farmhouses. It was nearly 9 when I finally stood on Grandma Ellis's doorstep, exhaustion setting in now that the adrenaline was wearing off. I hesitated before knocking. What if she turned me away? What if she called Dad immediately? But I had nowhere else to go, so I raised my hand and rapped softly on the door. Moments later, it swung open to reveal Grandma in her faded flannel nightgown, her silver hair twisted into a loose braid, reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. She looked startled for only a second before her expression shifted to something like knowing recognition. "Emma," she said simply, as if she'd been half expecting me. "I'm sorry it's so early," I began, the words catching in my throat. I didn't know where else. She pulled me into her arms before I could finish, the familiar scent of her lavender soap enveloping me. "I always knew you'd come to me when it got too heavy," she whispered against my hair. And just like that, the dam broke. All the tears I'd been holding back, through the humiliation of the family portrait, through the confrontation with Dad, through the silent early morning journey, came flooding out. I sobbed into her shoulder, my whole body shaking with the force of it. Grandma didn't shush me or tell me everything would be okay. She just held me tighter, one hand smoothing my hair, letting me cry until I had nothing left. When I finally pulled back, hiccuping and red-faced, she simply took my duffel bag from my shoulder and led me inside. Her home was exactly as I remembered it, though it had been nearly a year since my last visit. The vintage sofa with the crocheted throw blanket. The bookshelf stuffed with mystery novels and photo albums. The old upright piano that no one played anymore but was too precious to part with. The walls were covered with photos, so many photos. And unlike at home, I was in most of them. There I was as a baby in Mom's arms. As a toddler at the beach, bucket in hand. School pictures through the years, even the third grade one where I was missing my 2 front teeth. Recent ones, too, my middle school graduation, a candid shot of me reading in Grandma's garden last summer. My history, preserved and displayed with pride. Sit, Grandma instructed, guiding me to the kitchen table. I'll make us some breakfast, and then you can tell me what happened. I sank into the familiar chair, suddenly aware of how hungry I was. Grandma moved efficiently around the kitchen, pulling out a cast-iron skillet, cracking eggs, whisking in milk and vanilla. Soon, the comforting smell of pancakes filled the air. "You know," she said conversationally as she flipped a perfectly golden pancake, "your mother ran away once too. She was a bit older than you, 16, I think. Thought she was going to hitchhike to New York City and become a Broadway star." This was a story I'd never heard before. What happened? She made it as far as Hartford before she called me to come get her. Grandma chuckled, the sound warm and reassuring. Said she realized she'd forgotten to pack any shoes except the ones she was wearing. A small smile tugged at my lips despite everything. That sounded like Mom. She was always impulsive, your mother. But brave, too. Grandma set a plate of pancakes in front of me, drizzled with real maple syrup and topped with sliced strawberries, my favorite. Like someone else I know. I cut into the pancakes, the familiar comfort food helping to ground me. Between bites, I told her everything. The gradual chill that had settled over the house since Marissa moved in. The small ways I'd been edged out of family rituals. The photo incident. Dad's refusal to believe me. Unlike Dad, Grandma didn't question my perception or try to explain away Marissa's behavior. She listened, really listened, her blue eyes, so like Mom's, never leaving my face. She didn't interrupt, didn't try to offer solutions right away. She just gave me the gift of being heard. When I finished, she reached across the table and took my hand in hers, her skin paper thin, but her grip still strong. "You can stay here as long as you need to, Emma. This is your home too. It always has been." Relief washed over me, so powerful it made me dizzy. "What about Dad? He'll come looking for me." "Let me worry about your father," she said with a firmness that reminded me she'd raised not only my mother, but 3 other children as well. "You need rest. We can figure out the rest later." She showed me to the guest room, the one that had gradually accumulated bits and pieces of me over the years. A change of clothes in the dresser from previous visits. My favorite mug on the nightstand. A pressed flower bookmark between the pages of Little Women on the shelf. It wasn't exactly my room, but it held echoes of me, signs that I belonged. I slept for hours, the kind of deep, dreamless sleep that comes after emotional exhaustion. When I woke, the afternoon sun was slanting through the curtains, painting golden rectangles on the quilt. For a moment, I was disoriented, but then it all came rushing back. The photo, Dad's dismissal, my escape. I found Grandma in the garden, kneeling beside her tomato plants with a pair of pruning shears. She smiled when she saw me, patting the ground beside her. "Your father called," she said without preamble. "He found your note." My stomach clenched. "Is he coming here?" "I told him you're safe and you need some time." She snipped a yellowing leaf from the plant. "He wasn't happy, but he agreed to give you space. For now." I picked up a fallen tomato, rolling it between my palms. He thinks I'm being dramatic. Richard has always had a talent for seeing what he wants to see, Grandma said, referring to my father by his first name, something that had always struck me as strange. He doesn't want to believe Marissa could be cruel to you because that would mean he's failed you both, failed to protect you, failed to choose a partner who would love his child. Put that way, it made a sad kind of sense. Dad had always hated failing at anything. The days that followed took on a gentle rhythm. Grandma enrolled me in the local high school, a smaller, more intimate setting than my school back in Waterbury. I was surprised how quickly I adjusted, how easily I made a few friends. Zoe, who sat next to me in biology and shared her colored pens. Marcus, who played guitar and didn't laugh when I admitted I still liked Taylor Swift. Amelia, whose parents were divorced and who seemed to understand without explanation why I was living with my grandmother. At home, and it did feel like home, Grandma and I fell into comfortable routines. She taught me to bake her famous apple pie, the crust made with vinegar and ice water for flakiness. I helped her in the garden, learning the names of plants I'd never paid attention to before. In the evenings, we sometimes looked through photo albums, and she filled in the gaps of my mother's life that had begun to fade in my memory. My heart was healing in this quiet, loving space, but it was a gradual process. I still thought of Dad every day, wondering if he missed me or if Marissa had convinced him he was better off without his difficult teenage daughter. I wondered about Ethan, too, if he asked where I'd gone or if they'd told him anything at all. Then, one night, nearly 3 weeks after I'd arrived at Grandma's, my phone lit up on the nightstand. I'd kept it charged but mostly ignored, responding only to texts from my new friends. But this was different. This was a notification I couldn't ignore. 18 missed calls, all from Dad. My heart raced as I stared at the screen, the blue light illuminating my face in the darkness of Grandma's guest room. 18 missed calls. Not 1 or 2, 18. Each one a deliberate choice to press my name, to wait through the rings. What could have happened? Was someone hurt? Was it Ethan? The timestamp on the first call showed 4:13 p.m. The most recent was just 20 minutes ago, at 11:42 p.m. They'd come in clusters, like waves against a shore, 3 in the afternoon, 5 in the early evening, the rest scattered through the night as if he couldn't sleep, as if something was keeping him awake. My thumb hovered over the notification. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to switch the phone off and slide it into the drawer. I'd been finding my footing here in Glastonbury, creating a life that felt real and solid. Did I want to risk the fragile peace I'd found? But another part of me, the part that still longed for my father despite everything, couldn't turn away. With a shaky breath, I pressed play on the first voicemail. "Emma, it's Dad." His voice sounded strained, tight with an emotion I couldn't immediately identify. I need to know you're okay. Grandma says you are, but I need to hear it from you. Please call me." The second message was similar, though his voice had softened. "Sweetheart, please call me. I didn't know you'd actually leave." I never thought. He paused, and I heard him take a deep breath. "Just call me back. Please." By the fifth message, the strain in his voice had transformed into something raw and desperate. "Emma, I'm sorry. I should have listened to you. I should have." His voice cracked, and the message cut off abruptly. I sat up in bed, pulling my knees to my chest. This wasn't the father I'd left behind, the man too busy with his new family to notice what was happening to his daughter. This was the dad who'd sat with me through nightmares, who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd held my hand at Mom's funeral when both of us were drowning in grief. The ninth message hit me like a physical blow. "I saw the picture," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The family photo." I really looked at it this time. I saw her face. I saw how she looked at you, and I'm so sorry, Emma. You were telling the truth, and I didn't believe you. I pressed the phone to my chest, tears welling in my eyes. My father had finally seen what had been happening right in front of him all along. But why now? What had changed? The answer came in the 12th message, recorded just after 9 o'clock. "I found the others," he said, his voice hollow. The photos from Christmas, from Ethan's birthday. All of them. She's been doing this for months, hasn't she? Pushing you out, making it look like your choice. There was a long pause, filled only with the sound of his breathing. And I let her. God, Emma, what kind of father am I? The messages that followed chronicled a man unraveling, guilt and regret pouring through the phone like water through a broken dam. In one, he mentioned that Marissa had taken Ethan to her mother's house. In another, he said he'd been going through old photos of the three of us, him, Mom, and me, before Marissa, before everything changed. The final message, the 18th, was different from the others. His voice was steadier, though exhaustion bled through every word. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I don't deserve that. But I'm asking for a chance, Em. One chance to try to make things right. I'll be at Willoughby's Cafe tomorrow at noon. I'll wait for you as long as it takes. I sat in the dark for a long time after that, clutching the phone to my chest. For a moment, I wanted to call him back immediately, to tell him I was coming home, that everything could go back to normal. But part of me knew some things couldn't be fixed so easily. Trust, once broken, doesn't mend with just a few apologetic words. More than that, I wasn't sure I wanted to go back to that house, to face Marissa again, to try to reclaim a space that had never truly felt like mine since Mom died. The past weeks at Grandma's had shown me what it felt like to be truly seen, to exist in a place without having to make myself smaller, quieter, less present. I must have fallen asleep eventually, phone still in hand, because the next thing I knew, sunlight was streaming through the curtains and the smell of coffee was drifting up the stairs. I found Grandma in the kitchen, already dressed in her gardening clothes, a mug cupped between her hands. "You got calls last night," she said. Not a question. I nodded, sliding onto a stool at the counter. "Dad wants to meet me. Today at Willoughby's." Grandma set a mug of hot chocolate in front of me, her specialty, made with real chocolate melted slowly on the stove, not the powdered kind. "And what do you want to do?" "I don't know." I wrapped my hands around the warm mug. Part of me wants to hear what he has to say. But another part is afraid, she finished for me. Not afraid exactly. I searched for the right words. More like, "I'm not sure it'll change anything." He says he's sorry now, but what happens when Marissa comes back? What happens when she tells him I'm exaggerating again? Grandma reached across the counter and took my hand, her skin warm from the coffee mug. "Your father has always been stubborn. Even as a boy, once he made up his mind about something, it took an earthquake to change it." She smiled faintly. "When he met your mother, I told him she was too wild for him. He didn't speak to me for 3 months. Really? It was hard to imagine Dad defying Grandma for anyone, even Mom. Oh yes, but once he sees the truth, he doesn't back down from it." She squeezed my hand. "You don't have to decide today. Just know that your pain is valid. And it's okay if you're not ready to forgive him. Healing happens on your timeline, not his." Her words wrapped around me like one of her hand-knit blankets. What I was feeling wasn't just hurt or anger, it was grief. Grief for the family I'd lost when Mom died. Grief for the relationship with my father that had slowly eroded under Marissa's influence. Grief for the home that no longer felt like mine. I spent the morning in Grandma's garden, pulling weeds and deadheading flowers, the repetitive work soothing my racing thoughts. By 11, I'd made my decision. I showered, changed into a clean pair of jeans and the light green sweater Grandma had bought me last week, and asked if I could borrow her car. "You know how to get there?" she asked, handing me the keys to her old Subaru. I nodded. Willoughby's was only about 10 minutes away, in the center of town. "I might be a while. Take all the time you need." She cupped my face in her hands, the way Mom used to. "Remember, whatever happens, you have a home here." That doesn't change. It was those words that gave me the courage to drive into town, to park in front of the quaint cafe with its striped awning and window boxes full of geraniums. Through the glass, I could see him already there, sitting at a corner table, his shoulders hunched, looking older than I remembered. He glanced up anxiously each time the bell above the door chimed. I took a deep breath, stepped out of the car, and walked toward the cafe entrance. I wasn't sure what would come of this meeting, whether it would heal the rift between us or confirm that some things can't be fixed. But I knew I needed to find out. The bell above the door chimed as I entered Willoughby's cafe, immediately enveloping me in the warm scent of coffee and freshly baked muffins. It was a cozy place with exposed brick walls and mismatched vintage furniture, the kind of cafe where college students lingered over laptops and retirees gathered for morning gossip. At noon on a Tuesday, it was busy but not crowded. Dad saw me immediately. He stood up so quickly his chair scraped loudly against the wooden floor, drawing a few curious glances from nearby tables. He looked different, not just older or tired, though he was certainly both. Something fundamental had shifted in him, visible in the slight stoop of his shoulders, the uncertainty in his eyes. For a moment, we just looked at each other across the room, neither quite sure how to bridge the distance. Then I walked over, each step measured, deliberate. I didn't rush into his arms the way I might have once. I didn't smile. I simply slid into the chair across from him, setting my purse on the table between us like a small barrier. "Emma," he said, his voice catching on my name. He seemed unsure whether to reach for my hand, settling instead for wrapping his fingers around his coffee mug. "Thank you for coming." "You called 18 times," I said, my tone carefully neutral. "It seemed important." He nodded, the ghost of a smile flickering across his face. "You always were direct. Like your mother." He looked down at his coffee, now surely cold. "I ordered you hot chocolate. With cinnamon, the way you like it. But it's probably cold by now." "I can get you another, Dad." I interrupted his nervous rambling. "Why did you want to see me?" He took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. Then he looked me directly in the eye and said 3 words I hadn't expected. "I failed you." The simplicity of it, the lack of excuses or qualifications, momentarily stunned me into silence. A waitress approached with a fresh mug of hot chocolate, setting it down with a friendly, "Here you go, hon." I thanked her automatically, grateful for the brief interruption to collect my thoughts. When she walked away, Dad continued, his voice low and strained. "I've spent the last 3 weeks telling myself you were just being a typical teenager. That you were jealous of Marissa, resentful of Ethan, acting out for attention." He ran a hand through his hair, more gray now than I remembered. "It was easier than admitting the truth." "Which is?" I prompted, wrapping my hands around the warm mug but not drinking. "That I chose my comfort over your well-being." He looked away, out the window where rain had begun to fall lightly, streaking the glass. "After your mom died, I was so lost, Emma. You remember how it was. I could barely get out of bed some days." I did remember. Those dark months after Mom's funeral when the house felt like it was filled with fog, when meals were whatever I could microwave, when Dad moved through the rooms like a ghost. I'd been only 10, trying to hold us both together with my small hands. When I met Marissa, he continued, she seemed like a lifeline. Someone organized, confident, put together. Everything I wasn't. She made decisions when I couldn't. She got me out of the house, back to work, functioning again. "She was good for you," I acknowledged quietly. This was something I'd always understood, even resented. Marissa had saved my father when I couldn't. Maybe at first. Dad's fingers drummed nervously on the table. But I was so grateful, so desperate not to rock the boat, that I ignored the way she treated you. The comments, the exclusion, the subtle put-downs, I told myself she just needed time to adjust, that blending families was always hard. He pulled out his phone, unlocked it, and slid it across the table to me. On the screen was the family portrait from that day in the backyard. I hadn't actually seen it before, had avoided looking at the Silverwood family photos on Dad's social media for months. "Look at her face," he said softly. I forced myself to look. There they were, Dad, Marissa, Ethan, and her parents, arranged in a perfect family tableau. And there, at the edge of the frame, was my arm, caught in the act of being pushed away, the rest of me already out of the picture. But it was Marissa's expression that caught my attention, the satisfied smirk, the gleam in her eyes as she looked not at the camera, but at something out of frame. At me. "I saw this photo 100 times and never really saw it," Dad said, his voice thick with emotion. Not until I found that old album in the attic, the one with the pictures from Cape Cod, remember? You were about 8 and your mom was still healthy. You were building that massive sandcastle and she was helping you. He smiled at the memory. I was flipping through it and then I went back to Instagram, to this photo, and suddenly it was like scales falling from my eyes. I saw the look on Marissa's face. I remembered what you'd told me, and I knew you were telling the truth. My throat tightened. For so long, I'd wanted him to believe me. Now that he did, I wasn't sure what to feel. I confronted her, he continued, his voice hardening. I showed her the photo, asked her directly if she'd pushed you out of the frame. She denied it at first, but when I pressed her, she said some things I can't repeat. About you. About your mother. His jaw clenched. That's when I asked her to leave. You what? I couldn't hide my surprise. I told her to pack her things and go to her mother's. That I needed space to think. He looked down at his hands. She took Ethan and left that night. A complicated tangle of emotions knotted in my chest. Vindication, certainly, but also concern for little Ethan and a strange sort of emptiness where I'd expected satisfaction to be. What happens now? I asked. Dad shook his head slowly. I don't know exactly. I've spoken to a lawyer. The house was always in my name. We never got around to adding her to the deed after the wedding. He hesitated. I don't think she's coming back, Emma. Not after the things she said, the things I finally saw. We sat in silence for a while, the reality of what he was saying sinking in. My father had chosen me belatedly, but decisively. Part of me wanted to leap across the table and hug him, to forgive everything and go back to the way things were before Marissa. But I wasn't that person anymore. I needed you to believe me, I finally said, my voice steadier than I expected. That day, when I told you what happened, you chose her over me. Do you know how much that hurt? His face crumbled. I know. And I'll never forgive myself for that, Emma. Not completely. He reached across the table, palm up, an invitation but not a demand. I'm not asking you to come home right away. I understand if you need time, if you want to stay with your grandmother for a while longer. I want a chance to be your dad again. The dad you deserve. I looked at his outstretched hand, at the lines etched into his palm, hands that had taught me to ride a bike, that had held mine through Mom's illness, that had failed to protect me when I needed it most. I don't know if I'm ready, I admitted. Everything's different now. I like living with Grandma. I'm doing well at my new school. He nodded, withdrawing his hand slowly. I understand. We can take it slow. Maybe you could come for dinner sometime? Or I could come visit you at your grandmother's. Whatever you're comfortable with. For the first time since entering the cafe, I took a sip of my hot chocolate. It was perfect, rich and creamy with just the right amount of cinnamon. Dad had remembered, despite everything. Maybe dinner, I said cautiously. Not this week, but soon. The relief on his face was palpable, as if he'd been holding his breath since I walked in. Thank you, Emma. Don't thank me yet, I warned him. I'm not making any promises. I need to see that things will really be different. They will be, he said, with a conviction I hadn't heard from him in years. Whatever it takes, however long it takes. We didn't solve everything in that conversation. How could we? The wounds were too deep, the trust too badly damaged. But we opened a door that had been locked for far too long, let in a sliver of light where before there had been only darkness. As we left the cafe, the rain had stopped, leaving the world washed clean and gleaming. Dad hesitated at the door. Can I hug you? He asked, his voice soft, uncertain. I nodded, and he wrapped his arms around me, tentatively at first, then more securely when I didn't pull away. He smelled the same, like the sandalwood aftershave he'd used for as long as I could remember. For a moment, I was a little girl again, safe in my father's embrace. When we pulled apart, his eyes were damp. I love you, Emma. I never stopped, even when I was failing you. I know, I said, because deep down I did. I love you too, Dad. I watched him walk to his car, shoulders a little straighter now, before getting into Grandma's Subaru. As I drove back to her house, I felt something shift inside me, not healing exactly, not yet, but the beginning of it. A crack in the wall I'd built around my heart, letting in just enough light to see by. For years have passed since that day at Willoughby's Cafe. I'm 18 now, in my first semester at the University of Connecticut, studying psychology. My dorm room is small but cozy, decorated with string lights, concert posters, and photos. So many photos, each one a piece of the life I've built since that summer when everything fell apart and then, slowly, came back together in a different shape. The changes didn't happen overnight. Trust is like that, easy to break, painstaking to rebuild. For the first few months after our meeting, Dad and I took small steps toward each other. Sunday dinners at Grandma's, where the three of us would cook together, talk about mundane things, carefully avoiding the landmines of the past. Occasional movie nights, just the two of us, rediscovering our shared love of sci-fi and terrible action films. Phone calls that grew less awkward with time. I never moved back to the house in Waterbury. That chapter had closed for both of us. Dad sold it eventually, buying a smaller place closer to Glastonbury. Too many ghosts, he said, and I understood he meant both Mom's absence and the shadow Marissa had cast. The new house was modest, but bright, a fixer-upper that gave him a project to focus on, a fresh start. Marissa filed for divorce 3 months after she left. The proceedings were messy but mercifully brief. I never saw her again, though occasionally I'd hear updates through the grapevine. She remarried last year, a real estate developer from Greenwich with no children of his own. I hope she's happy. I hope she's kinder to him. Ethan was the unexpected complication. At 5, then 6, then 7, he didn't understand why his world had been upturned, why his mother and the man he'd known as his father were suddenly living apart. Dad fought for visitation rights, not because he had any legal claim, but because he loved Ethan despite everything. Surprisingly, Marissa agreed. Perhaps she recognized that Ethan needed stability wherever he could find it. Or perhaps she simply wanted weekends free with her new partner. So every other Saturday, Dad would drive to Greenwich and bring Ethan back to his place for the weekend. Sometimes, if I was visiting, I'd be there too. It was awkward at first, this little boy who looked so much like his mother but had none of her coldness. He'd ask innocent questions that cut deep. Why did you go away, Emma? Or, are you still my sister even though Mommy and Daddy Richard aren't married? Gradually, though, we formed our own relationship, separate from the tangled history of our parents. I taught him to ride a bike in the park near Dad's new house. He showed me his collection of rocks and dinosaur figurines with solemn importance. We developed inside jokes and traditions, pancakes shaped like monsters on Sunday mornings, marathon viewings of animated movies on rainy afternoons. He's 9 now, a thoughtful kid with a sharp sense of humor. Not my brother by blood, but family all the same. Grandma's house remained my anchor through it all. I lived there through the rest of high school, thriving in ways I never had in Waterbury. I joined the school newspaper, discovered a talent for photography, made friends who knew nothing of my complicated past. Mrs. Sullivan, my English teacher, became a mentor, encouraging me to apply to college, to believe I had something valuable to offer the world. Dad supported me through it all, showing up for parent-teacher conferences alongside Grandma, cheering loudly at my graduation, helping me move into my dorm room just last month. We're not perfect. We still have moments when old hurts resurface, when a careless word reopens a wound we thought had healed. But we're trying, both of us, to be better for each other. On my desk here at UConn, next to my laptop and textbooks, there's a photo in a simple silver frame. It was taken 2 summers ago at Lake Candlewood, where Grandma, Dad, and I rented a cabin for a week. We'd spent the day swimming and kayaking, and as the sun began to set, Dad asked a passing hiker to take our picture. In the photo, Grandma and I are sitting on the end of the dock, our feet dangling in the water. She has her arm around my shoulders, and we're both laughing at something Dad said just before the shutter clicked. The setting sun turns our faces golden, and the lake behind us reflects the pink and orange sky. You can just see Dad's shadow at the edge of the frame. He ran to join us after handing over the camera, but didn't quite make it in time. It's not a perfect photo. It's slightly blurry, and the composition is off-center. But it captures something real, a moment of genuine joy shared by people who chose to love each other despite everything. I keep it there to remind me of who saw me when I felt invisible, of who loved me when I didn't know how to love myself, of who made space for me when I thought I had nowhere to belong. That photo means more than any posed family portrait ever could. Sometimes I think about the girl I was at 14, standing alone in a backyard, watching a family arrange itself without her. I wish I could tell her that the pain won't last forever, that one day she'll build a life that fits her, with people who value her presence, that the very rejection that broke her heart will ultimately lead her to discover her own strength. I still have the silver locket Mom gave me before she died. I wear it on important days, exams, interviews, first dates. But I've added something to it. Alongside the tiny photo of Mom and me, there's now an equally tiny version of the lake photo. Past and present, side by side. The family I lost and the family I found. Last week, I met with my advisor to discuss potential research projects for my psychology degree. I'm interested in studying resilience in adolescence, how young people navigate trauma and loss, how they build support systems when traditional family structures fail them. Dr. Patterson listened intently as I outlined my ideas, then asked what drew me to this particular area of study. I hesitated, then told her a simplified version of my story. Not all of it. Some parts still feel too private, too raw, but enough. When I finished, she nodded thoughtfully. You know, she said, the most compelling research often comes from our own wounds, not because suffering gives us special insight, but because it gives us genuine questions. You're not just theorizing about resilience, you've lived it. I've been thinking about her words ever since. If someone had told 14-year-old me that one day I'd see value in that painful experience, I wouldn't have believed them. Yet here I am, finding purpose in the very thing that once nearly broke me. Dad called last night, just to check in. He does that more often now that I'm away at college, brief calls about nothing in particular, his way of maintaining connection across the distance. He mentioned that Ethan's been asking when I'll be home for a visit. Thanksgiving's not that far away, he said. We could do something special. Maybe take a drive up to Vermont, see the last of the fall colors. That sounds nice, I told him, and meant it. We talked a bit longer about ordinary things, my classes, his job, Grandma's new book club, before saying goodnight. After we hung up, I found myself looking at the photo on my desk, tracing the outline of our figures with my finger. I don't know if I'll ever completely get over that day in the backyard. The memory still stings when I let myself recall it fully. But I've learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending the wound never existed. It means growing around the pain, incorporating it into the person you're becoming, not allowing it to define you, but acknowledging its place in your story. In the photo on my desk, I'm laughing with my head thrown back, utterly present in that moment of joy. Not because I'd forgotten the girl who stood alone watching a family portrait that excluded her, but because I'd carried her with me, held her close, and promised her that one day, things would be different. And they are. Not perfect. Not unbroken. But real and honest and mine. A life rebuilt from fragments, stronger at the mended places. A family redefined by choice rather than circumstance. A heart that knows its own worth. That's the story told by the photo I keep now. And it's enough.